On pages of several dailies. But before we take a look at that, let me just remind you what our topic of conversation this morning is. I am your host, Olive Burrows, as clearly indicated on the poster here. Double victims of colonialism, rewriting Africa's role on the global stage is what we're discussing. And with me in studio, we have Ambassador Erastus Mwencha. He is a former Deputy Chairman, African Union Commission, and former Secretary General, COMESA. He currently sits as chair of several boards and on several boards. It would be a very long list if I was to get into that, but this offices he's held will provide a lot of context and a lot of background and a lot of information for us this morning. We also have in studio Professor Noah Midamba, former Vice Chancellor, KCA University, Professor of Defense and Foreign Policy. He also consults. I've seen him on several websites, but I will not get into all of that. We have Dr. Patrick Maluki, Chair, Department of Diplomacy and International Studies, University of Nairobi. I also saw co-chair of the Sustainable SDSN. Yes. All right, so he co-chairs that as well.
Development Solution of Kenya.
Okay. Sustainable Development Solutions.
Kenya.
And the N stands is part of the solutions.
Network.
Yeah. Okay. Of Kenya. I was not entirely too sure. That's why I didn't put it on the poster. Now we have confirmed.
Diplomatic Scholars Association of Kenya.
Okay, Chairman of Diplomatic Scholars Association of Kenya. Speaking of scholars, we are expecting Dr. Njoki Wamai to join us shortly. She has a PhD Politics and International Studies and is an assistant professor, USIU Africa. I am in very good company this morning. If ever competence had a face, this is it. Okay, let's take a look now at those dailies. Daily Nation front page story: Ruto reignites fuel tax storm, finance bill. And they tell us here that President William Ruto's quest to reinstate an unpopular fuel tax that his predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta was forced to shelve revives the political games that stop petroleum pricing and exposes Kenya Kwanza leaders doublespeak on a matter of public interest that has a direct impact on the cost of living. I see here 16% is the figure in question. Value-added tax, VAT on fuel, is currently 8%, but state is seeking to double it. I remember Julian Zamboko tweeted a thread on this very subject, and he asked how, in this economic climate, Julian Zamboko being in charge, being the person in charge of business and technology at the Nation Media Group. Civil servants, as I mentioned, this is on several front pages. Civil servants threaten to go on strike over housing fund. Civil servants unions have threatened to stage a nationwide strike if the government proceeds with its plan to deduct 3% of their salaries as mandatory contributions to the housing fund. And for parents, schools reopen today for second term. Back to school. Learners in primary and secondary schools will resume today for a 14-week second term, with a half-term break set to begin on June 29th and end July 2nd. If I scroll further down, I see here dispute. We are not running away. James Finley says on sale amid allegations of sexual exploitation of workers and poor working conditions. Multinational James Finley Kenya has denied claims it sold its estates in the country to evade further scrutiny. And on pages 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation, you'll see KQ tragedy, dead in 102 seconds, revisiting the Douala plane crash 16 years later, retracing Kenya Airways flight KQ 507 on the night of Friday, May the 5th, 2007, that crashed soon after takeoff, killing all 114 people on board. And they tell us more on this is on page 6 and 7 of the Daily Nation. Let me take a look at ntvkenya.co.ke, because therein should be the special report that was filed for NTV by none other than Duncan Haemba. Let me just show you where you can find the full report if you hadn't come across it. ntvkenya.co.ke. This is our website in case you're unable to find any of our reports on our YouTube channel, which is NTV Kenya. You can find them on our website. This is it. Death toll from DR Congo floods is the latest story. Nearly hits 400 at that Sunday evening. And here we go. This is that special report by Duncan Haemba. You just go to our homepage and here you find it. Flight 507, 102 seconds in the air, the crash cause. Hit play and you can find all of it, the entire of this special report there. So ntvkenya.co.ke. Let me just expand that for you so that you get the full picture. There we go. There is Duncan Haemba. All right. I won't give it away so that you have reason to visit the website. Let's go back to the dailies. Take a look at what else they contain. And let's take a look at the Business Daily now. State pay to retirees falls by 36 billion shillings amid cash crunch. Government pension doubles in 4 years to 172 billion shillings. Pensioners' pay plunges 38% in 9 months to March. This particular report filed by Constant Munda. Let's take a look at the first few paragraphs to get a sense of the story. And it reads, Treasury's payments to retired civil servants have dropped by more than a third, or 36.9 billion shillings in the 9 months to March, amid a cash squeeze that points to delayed disbursement of state pensions. Okay, we scroll further down front page of the Business Daily. Energy sector salaries beat bankers in rank of top jobs. The energy sector has overtaken financial services in the ranking of Kenya's highest paying jobs on the back of increased investments by foreigners. Employees in the electricity and gas business took home an average of 182,000 a month last year, up from 173,000 in 2021. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics data shows. Penalty, let's take a look at the ticker now. Penalty for wealthy tax cheats to rise to 167%. Kenya's super rich individuals and firms that knowingly make false declaration of income face a steep jump in penalties in proposed changes to law. Treasury CS and Njuguna Ndongo wants the penalties for tax evasion raised more than 1.5 times. I see state shield cement firms with clinker tax. Local producers of clinker will be handed a boost with a proposal to introduce a new tax as the state moves in to make imports of the commodity costlier. And finally, on the front page of the Business Daily, fixed income lifts pension schemes returns in Q1. Pension schemes posted positive returns in the first quarter of the year on increased yields from fixed income to emerge from the negative returns they had booked in the corresponding period last year. Let's now take a look at my favorite, and that is Taifa Leo. And this is the Taifa Leo headline this morning. Raila atetea Pastor Ezekiel. And here I see an image of Cliff Ombeta, the Pastor Ezekiel in question, and Raila Odinga. Siasa na dini, uchunguzi dhidi ya mhubiri Ezekiel Odero wa kanisa la New Life lilio eneo la Mavueni County ya Kilifi huenda ukachukua mwelekeo wa kisiasa. Hii ni baada ya mhubiri huyo kukutana na kinara wa ODM Bwana Raila Odinga na gavana wa Kilifi Bwana Gideon Mung'aro waliotetea kazi yake. More on that, they tell us on ukurasa wa pili, page 2 of the Taifa Leo. I see at the very top here an image of President William Ruto. Watumishi wa umma watishia kugomea Ruto kuhusu ushuru wa nyumba. Vyama vya wafanyikazi vinavyotetea wafanyikazi wa sekta ya umma vimeitaka serikali kuondoa ushuru wa hazina ya nyumba wa 3% inayopanga kukata katika mishahara yao kila mwezi, na vikatisha kugoma iwapo haitafanya hivyo. Mwanamke aokolewa akisubiri kufa. Polisi wanusuru, let's see what this is about. Polisi wanusuru mama mgonjwa ambaye kanisa lake lilimkataza kupata matibabu. Mhubiri mwimbaji, soma makala ya elimu msingi kupata maarifa ya masomo ya humu nchini. So that's it for Taifa Leo. Let's take a look now at the East African. Given we are discussing matters to do with the global stage and Africa, and this is what the East African has. China takes over ECOP funding. Stan Chart walked back on $5 billion funding deal over project pollution concerns, leaving Beijing to pick up the tab of the Uganda-Tanzania cross-border investment. I see also on the front page of the East African discussing world peace. Rwanda's Paul Kagame and Rishi Sunak of the United Kingdom talk about global security challenges, including in Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Ukraine. Over 300 deaths reported in the DRC Rwanda floods. A visit by world leaders expose Ruto's rising star on the globe. This is part of what we'll be discussing this morning. The Kenyan president, battling legitimacy challenges at home, has become a region's poster child of diplomacy. I'm curious what my panelists make of that. Let's see. Tax pain for Kenya's household workers. Treasury targets the salaried with higher levies. Markets regulator wants preferential tax. CMA is pushing for graduated tax rates for new listings. Fate of the unwanted Africans of the Horn. 8.5 million residents of the region have moved to 12 countries. And opinion piece, Uganda versus Sweden. No comparison. Sweden builds roads to charge cars. UG collects trash. Okay, that's it for the East African. Let's take a look at the Standard. Glass of water, tafadhali. Tunaomba maji ya kunywa. I'm also a little parched myself. Let's take a look at the Standard. Civil servants defy order on new taxes. I had mentioned that this was on the front page of several dailies. Public service employees say the proposed tax measures will eat up to 52% of their pay, which they claim is overtaxation, and call on MPs to reject the finance bill. The finance bill, if passed, will see a total deduction of 52% of workers' monthly earnings, leaving only 48% subjected to 16% VAT for every purchase of goods and services. That is a quote of one Charles Mukwaya, the KUSU Secretary General. And in this image, we have the KUSU Secretary General, this man here, Charles Mukwaya, and his counterparts from KMPDU, Dr. Davji Bimji, and WASU's Constantine Wasonga, addressing a press conference in Nairobi over taxation proposals. Top versities face uncertainty in new funding plan. Unlike in the past, when funding and student numbers were guaranteed, public universities will now have to come up with ways to attract numbers. I see they also tell us eat less meat to cut global warming, and Ezekiel back in church to jubilation. At the very top here, I read victims of Saudi abuse in court for compensation. Tender wars threaten Dongo Kundu project as 8 killed in Texas mall shooting. Finally, let's take a look at the Star before we get into some of those stories highlighted on the front page of the East African. MP Shungwa reversing the mess Uhuru left will take time. He says salary review, the ward reps want independent budgets and ward development fund. MCA's pay campaign, 400,000 shillings is the new target. I see a little more detail beneath that. The county lawmakers presently earn 144,373 monthly, 16% of what governors are paid. Raila proposes Kimathi widow's funeral service be held at Uhuru Gardens. There he is yesterday at the Lee Funeral Home. Down here, I see doctors to go on strike today, says KMPDU. Secretary General, Medical Services in public hospitals are set to get messy after doctors said they will start their strike today, saying talks with the government collapsed. Secretary General Davji Bimji Atela said he told all the intern doctors not to go to work. Interior CS Kindiki is a U-turn on deport order for Ghanaian. There was drama when Interior CS Kithure Kindiki stops the planned deportation of a Ghanaian national who is witness in a 130 million shilling fake gold case. Steward Tom had been hauled to Jomo Kenyatta International Airport on Friday, and global threat work together on climate change or perish, Ruto urges. President William Ruto has urged the Western world to stop finger-pointing and work together to confront climate change. The president said climate change poses a threat to all nations that must now work together or perish together. More on that I can see here on page 2 of the Star. President William Ruto has urged the world to stop finger-pointing and work together to confront climate change. And he was speaking during the Strategic Dialogue on the African Climate Action Summit held at the Global Center on Adaptation in Rotterdam, the Netherlands. Let me reintroduce my panelists because I'd like them to comment on this climate change agenda that the Ruto administration is pushing fiercely. And with me in studio, just to reintroduce them, we have Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, former Deputy Chairman, African Union Commission, former Secretary General, COMESA, Professor Noami Damba, former Vice Chancellor, KCA University, Professor of Defense and Foreign Policy, Dr. Patrick Maluki, Chair, Department of Diplomacy and International Studies, University of Nairobi. I will start with you, Professor Midamba. Good morning.
Good morning, Olive, and thank you for having us.
I'm very happy to have you in studio.
Thank you.
What do you make of this climate change push that we're seeing the Ruto administration undertake? When the Japanese Prime Minister was here, he spoke on climate change. He said, we thank you for your investment in geothermal, but we need more investment in new technologies. Same message he passed when the German Chancellor was here. Same message he passed when the UN Secretary General was here. And even at the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, during the Mo Ibrahim conversation he had with Mo Ibrahim at the foundation's governance weekend, it was something he spoke about at length. Why do you think this is?
Olive, every Kenyan and the world need to know that climate change is real. It's affecting everything. Our life, our future, our development, absolutely everything. We still have time to have certain control over it. Otherwise, it will engulf us as the ocean will rise. There will be some serious drought in some areas. There will be some real flood that will wash everything that we do. And so it is affecting us, and mainly is being affected by the north, by the industrial countries. We are not helping in any way because we are saying, we in Africa are saying that they, the one who polluted, and we did not pollute, and we need development. So we need to use the same pollutant ingredient that they have used to industrialize. Where's the medium? We need a global solution, a regional solution, a national solution, which are all tied together in order to have some cap over it. And we do have the time to do that.
Okay. What do you make of the push towards, because he said the conversation has mainly been around adaptation and loss and damage, but President William Ruto is saying this needs to move further to investment. He says that's where the real money is, investment in green energy. Ambassador Mwencha.
Thank you very much, Olive. Perhaps before I comment on this climate matter, very important, I think it's important for us to recognize one of the major events that took place over the weekend. The coronation, it wasn't even in the headlines.
It was.
You know, that was a major event, seeing that institution that has lived on for centuries and how things were done to detail, and King Charles being the oldest person to be crowned. But also, I mean, today is a new term for our children, our students going back, to wish them well as they travel, but also as they study. And now coming to matters of climate, Olive, if you now even Google and ask yourself, what are the 5 most important challenges facing the world? Climate change will pop up as the #1. And so you would expect any country who is interested in this, what you aptly summed up as we all sink together or survive together, will be responsible in trying to address that. But Noah has made a very strong case in saying, look, there has not been fairness in determining how to move forward from the challenges that we find ourselves. This being the case, what is behind this? If you look at what has brought us to here, we have not been responsible in the way we exploit resources for our comfort, for our development. We have used technologies that were destroying our environment. And developed countries have climbed the ladder to be where they are now. Now that they have reached there, they are throwing away the ladder, saying, no, you don't need to come this way, the way we came. And they are leaving us down on the ground, stranded. And Africa is asking, you created the mess, and you are telling us to be part of the solution, but you don't even want to help us to come to where you are. And so what are the issues? If you look at, for instance, Africa, Africa's population today, and we'll be looking at it later on, in terms of global population, is about 17%. But we only contribute about less than 4% of the global green gases. Less than 4%. Some of these countries, if you look at, for instance, US, it must be contributing over 20–30%. But what US's population is less than 5%. It's about 5%, if not less. And so, but they want us to go in the same direction that they now have reached because they have capital, they have technology. But we can't because we still have poverty. We still have underdevelopment. We haven't industrialized. We need to create jobs. And so this is the discussions we're having. Yes, Kenya, the question you ask, Kenya has put it in the forefront. Well, I think Kenya is being responsible, perhaps, because if you look at Kenya's contribution to this mess, it's less than 0.1%. Less than 0.1%. But look at Kenya, if you look at Kenya in terms of the energy, because energy is one of the sectors that is contributing a lot to this, Kenya is almost 90% green energy. And so we are already there. In fact, the rest of the world to catch up with Kenya will take ages. And so for us to put it, there's no effort to put. We are also already saying we are there. You join us in this list. But as we join here, you must then address the issues. How do we move forward together? Because Kenya still needs to create jobs.
Yes.
Kenya needs to create them, to industrialize. And how are we going to industrialize? These are the issues that are on the table.
These are indeed the issues that are on the table. And I will get more into that with you, Professor Midaba. But before then, I'm looking at the East African. And then this is what it says. Visits by world leaders expose Ruto's rising star on the globe. The Kenyan president, battling legitimacy challenges at home, has become region's poster child of diplomacy. Do you agree?
Thank you, Olive. Yeah, before I get to that, I just wanted to add a comment on what Ambassador just said with regard to the climate change situation. And I think I want to applaud the Kenyan leadership because by default, Kenya must be a climate change champion. First, we hosted the UNEP, which is a global body responsible for climate change, climate adaptation. And therefore, we must lead by example. We are also we of course also remember the track record of Professor Wangari Maathai, a very renowned environmentalist. And one of the challenges in global problems today has been lack of leadership. And I think it's very important for Kenya to provide leadership. Professor Wangari Maathai told us that I'm doing the little I can. And therefore, I think whatever measure that the government has taken with regard to climate change adaptation is very commendable. And we need to adhere to some of the principles of our foreign policy. I think environmental diplomacy is one of the pillars of the Kenyan foreign policy, and therefore when the president pronounces himself and actually hosts international guests on this matter is very, very important. So I think that really commendable. Turning to, yes, where we are with regard to the new kid on the international diplomatic, I think President Ruto is really scoring very well. Last week, it was like his birthday in the international realm. And either by default or lack or arrangement, I think it is sending some message that the Kenya diplomacy has come of age, that basically some work is being done with regard to courting international partners and global players. And I think this is really encouraging. Yes, it may not be at its best, but I think the effort that we've seen are really putting Kenya in the global map. And remember, we are in an international system that is really a self-help system where everyone must put his best foot forward. And I think what happened last week is very commendable, and that would be indication of better things to come if they keep that record.
All right. Professor Midamba, before we take the break, I'm curious, former President Uhuru Kenyatta was considered by some the darling of the international community. Have they opened their arms as well to President William Ruto, in your estimation?
Olive, diplomacy and international relations need stability, need consistency, and need connection of the mind, which is from transition of government from one to another. If you look at the British system, it has been very consistent, professional development. American system, the same way. Russia, the same way. Chinese are very consistent on their development from one to another. And there was a little breakdown at the beginning in terms of transition, which is very, very dangerous for us, for what's called externalities, for our reputation around the world. And that breakdown was not good. It needed to be all patched together between the former president and the new president, because the former president had the most breakthrough in terms of foreign policy. I was fortunate to be one of the people who did dialogue on him in terms of Kenya foreign policy. This is the time that we have risen to the highest level of leadership of East and Central Africa. Kenya was considered a reluctant leader. We have 4 pillars in Africa that are very important. Southern Africa, South Africa, dominant South Africa. West Africa, Nigeria. North Africa, Egypt. East Africa, Kenya. Kenya is the number 4th largest economy in East and Central Africa. Kenya has an incredible military establishment, very professional. And Kenya has established itself as a pillar of stability in this area. And therefore, we were a reluctant leader, but Uhuru Kenyatta woke up and engaged the world. And Kenya is now talked about because there is something happening globally. We are reawakening of Africa after 139 years since Berlin Conference. Then, as this is happening, Africa is now the most beautiful lady in the house. I'm not talking about you only.
I am African.
Africa is now, and the suitors are coming from all over the world. Given the kind of international climate, Russia, Ukraine, America, China, war. And then we'll be talking in the next segment, if you allow me, what Africa presents and what Africa is all about. Africa is now the center of the world. And therefore, you're looking at the regions and how does the region face up. And Kenya has risen up globally and regionally as a pillar of stability, of leadership. It doesn't matter of all, squabble we have at home. But internationally, we have done very well. So I'm very glad that President Ruto is picking up where Uhuru is to really move to that leadership. But he needs a lot of help domestically so that he can be steady on that stage, because that's what he requires. And you need people like Kenyatta also back on the fold, to work together.
Okay, all right. We take a break, as I mentioned, but when we come back with that reawakening of Africa. And we haven't entirely shelved the climate change conversation. There is more to be said on that coming up on the other side of this break.
Yo, Butruse K, the sharp god up in the mix. Now I'm saying NTV, shout out to you, bro. Keep it locked. Hey.
Sauti yako ina sound vizuri kwenye masikio.
I like it. Come to the dance floor, babe.
Angie.
Leo tuna festa fe banga. Festa fe banga. Another banga.
And it's just like an amazing mix.
I am happy today.
Kama vitu unanilea. Oh yeah. Inaweka shida chini na tupa mikono juu. Banjuka tu.
No compromise, this the hottest combo.
Unistima, uninare. Mix on NTV. Don't touch that dial. Not it. No wagwate.
In your paper this week, the unwanted general in Congo mission. Kenya's Major General Jeff Nyaga exited as commander of regional force in DRC, a scared man. He indicated he has been intimidated, threatened, and called names. Kenya church deaths expose deep-rooted cults in East Africa. Plus our opinion leaders. Comedy speaks truth to leadership. So, bring out the clowns. LC Eakuze. Uganda's angry phone holder is moving state agents to action. Joachim Buembo. Magazine. Home, away from home. Finding peace and calm in Kinshasa. For these and more stories, get your copy of the East African.
In life, you could be eager to be employed or be self-employed. Either way, you do need the right skills. This is the point where Goodwall is essential to you. Goodwall is a professional social media platform that offers you earning and learning opportunities. It offers you great chances to grow in your career, learn new skills, showcase your existing skills, network with like-minded people, or get job opportunities. Nation Media Group, in partnership with Goodwall, aim at providing solutions to unemployed African youth, creating digital content that inspires young people to stretch themselves and get the right skills that are useful to employers and their peers. So, how can you be part of this? Every month, we'll give you a chance to win $150 through our monthly challenge. Anyone can participate. Just look out for the challenges on NTV Kenya's social media platforms. Join the challenge now.
Shauri gani kwani wewe abani kuwa na experience ya kupiga simu? Ni siku yako ya kwanza ya kupiga simu. Abani harakisha mimi. Sisi ni watu wanapenda kubeleka bole bahali yake. Unafikiria mimi kutoka Wajir kutembea mpaka kuenda Isli mguu na bado nasukuma garmia ni kitu ya dakika mbili. Huwa beshianti mimi atashika simu. Bani gasirisha mimi. Mimi nakuwaga mtu mbole sana.
To get Waria, dial star 811 star 933 hash. Skiza, Nation.
I came in, she pulled out the gun and said if she can't have me, nobody can. What do I do?
It's your fault that my marriage is falling apart.
Diana.
Get out of here! Get out of here now! Get out!
What this woman needs from you is simply your attention. Give her that, and you'll see she'll stop acting so stupid!
Andres? Don't tell me the cab stand I called sent you to pick me up.
Quite a coincidence. Natalia.
Head over heels.
tea freshness in every sip.
Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
All right, welcome back to AM Live, and with me in studio we have Dr. Patrick Maluki, Chair, Department of Diplomacy and International Studies, University of Nairobi, Professor Odia. Spill, if you can clean it up, especially the phone. Professor Noami Damba, former VC, KCA University, Professor of Defense and Foreign Policy, and Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, former Deputy Chairman, African Union Commission, former Secretary General, COMESA. All right, let me invite Ambassador Mwencha, because I didn't give him the opportunity to respond to this particular story in the East African, which is visits by world leaders expose Ruto's rising star on the globe. The Kenyan president, battling legitimacy challenges at home, has become region's poster child of diplomacy. Ambassador, your take on this? Has he become the region's poster child of diplomacy?
Olive, I don't know the meaning of the word foster child. I must start with that. But let me talk, look at it from the broad aspect of the African continent. Having sat at the AU and looked at the countries in Africa, it dawned on me that out of 55 countries, 48 to 49 of them have gone through some pains of developing nationhood. And these pains come in because developing a nation state is not easy. It requires very strong statesmanship that unites the country, that projects a country with a development agenda, but also fitting very well in the international community. Kenya has been lucky to have escaped all these coaches all these years, and we're here. And I don't think this is something that as Kenyans we should take for granted, because there is a very thin line between what you might call peace and insecurity. And that thin line can be brought out by a very small matchstick that you light and the country is ablaze. And so any effort to try and keep a country together, keep a country united, focus on the agenda, because that is what is important. To me, that's what I would want to focus on. I am not sure that if people, you're trying to imply that the president is doing it to get legitimacy internationally, that's what I am not sure I understand that. The author of that article should really come out and tell us what they mean by the word foster child, because I don't understand for sure.
Mm-hmm. My understanding of it is this, and good that Mumesomea Politics and International Studies, Dr. Maluki, is if you listen to the statements that were made, for example, when the Japanese Prime Minister was speaking and he said President William Ruto was elected in a democratic election, and then he said in September last year, August, but the process went through to September. It felt like there was a quid pro quo, because then President William Ruto came in and he said, and I quote, because I have it in my notes here, Let us see. He said the meeting provided us another opportunity to evaluate our shared values and mutual commitment to uphold a rules-based international order. So he could have been speaking about Ukraine, which he later on said, you know, made reference to the aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and this is ahead of the Africa-Russia summit, Russia-Africa summit. But it could also have, some could read it to mean reference to the maandamano that we've been seeing in Kenya. Your take?
Thank you very much, Olive, on that, because I think we have to draw some line here, because domestic politics and international politics, somehow they are linked. You know, you cannot separate them completely. One speaks to another one. And I think the question of legitimacy would really dent the image of the government in power, because democratic processes actually confer legitimacy to any leader. So it is not in vain to hear these words coming up even when we have international guests, because there must be justification as to why Japan is engaging with Kenya. You are engaging with who? So I think that underscoring the legitimacy was very necessary, that to the understanding of international players, they are engaging with a legitimate government of Kenya, having gone through an election which was verified by the courts. And I think that message was deliberate. It wasn't just a way of speaking. And why is this necessary? It's necessary because whenever countries change governments, there could be contestations which are democratic, which are necessary. But I think the question of legitimacy, even as we underscore the Maandamano agenda, is very critical. Because if that card is played well, then of course it will really mean that Ruto has no mandate to engage with international players, and therefore that justification was necessary. And so quite a number of the visitors who came, including the Canadian Prime Minister, they said they are not able to discuss the matter of election of Ruto because that was decided by the Kenyans and the courts verified. So to the extent that Ruto is in government, it's now clear that those coming really regard the election as legitimate, the position he holds as the president of Kenya. But let me say that when it comes to diplomacy, what we are seeing now should not just be credit to Ruto alone, because the government of Kenya has been there. The government is not just the president, it is the institutions, it is the other organs of government, and therefore there has been a clear trajectory of Kenya moving forward. And I think a professor mentioned this, that from the time of President Uhuru, there's been a reawakening of the Kenyan state, and trying to come out of what has been referred to as a shy power. You know, when you interact with the diplomat, they will tell you that in Africa, we have the 4 pillars: Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa. Unfortunately, Kenya has not really played its role as expected. And of course, our pragmatic foreign policy had something to do with that. But now, I think it has done to the Kenyan state and the state machinery that we need to take responsibility. We cannot always hide behind our internal contestations, but there is also an international responsibility that as a state we need. And lucky enough, just as Abasan has said, Kenya has moved in its state building and constitutional dispensation and shown some stability. In a democracy, we expect these kind of contestations. The noises are very important because they keep the government on its toes. However, we've not lost track. And I want to thank other arms of government, including the parliament. They are functional, the courts are functional, the military has really held its position very well. And this is very healthy. So as to whether Ruto is legitimate or not legitimate, that is really on his responsibility to actually confirm. And that's what is coming up, that yes, as far as the international community is concerned, the election in Kenya went through, and therefore whatever other contestation we have about our living standards, about the salaries, these are normal national politics that can be contested. But the question of legitimate would have really been difficult if it was not resolved. And I think that's the message which is coming out.
Okay. So what this flurry of international visitors that we've seen, is it to do with concerns over regional stability given the situation in Sudan and also the protest demonstrations that were witnessed in Nairobi? Is it about the Climate Action Summit that is coming up in September? Is it about 60 years of diplomatic relations, as I had the president make reference to where Japan and Germany are concerned? What is this, or have these issues just conveniently converged at the same time?
Only let me put the layers down and then arrive to the role that Kenya is playing. First of all, the war between Ukraine and Russia, involving Europe, involving United States, has created a different concept of the world. Russian power has been seriously degraded. So Russia today cannot fight conventional war with Europe, except Russia's incredible arsenal as far as nuclear warheads are concerned. The rest of the world, particularly America, would like to reduce that drastically, of have an ability to eliminate. And America has been working very close with Israel to develop a deterrent such that Russia warheads will not be able to hit America easily. Now, one thing that our listener and everyone need to understand is the president of the United States, the president of China and Russia does not go to sleep and wake up in the morning thinking about a child that has not eaten in Africa. That is our responsibility. And something that has happened, there is a potential conflict between China and United States, which is enormous. Climate change is a big issue that engulfs the whole world. There is a growing humanitarian crisis that is happening right now. Now, I talk about Russia seriously degraded as far as its power is concerned. What role is Africa playing? Okay, this need to be understood. As of now, Africa has 1.4 billion people, which is the same size like China and the same size like India. Africa has 54, is it 54?
55.
55 countries. Africa has 40% of the world gold in this continent. Africa has 90% of chrome and platinum in this continent. Africa has the largest reserve of diamond, uranium, or whatever you can think about. Africa has 10% of renewable fresh water in the world. Now, when you look at the U.S. Gross national product, is $25 trillion. Compare with the mineral resource within DRC Congo alone, is all estimated at $25 trillion. So everybody is now looking at this beautiful lady. I started talking about this beautiful lady, and they want to have a hand in, after 139 years since Berlin Conference, they are reawakening. And Europe is coming to Africa. We have China, Russia, US. We have now India, which is growing as a power and coming back to Africa. We have Turkey. We have Saudi Arabia. You have URE. One of them flew to South Africa the other day with 45 workers landing in South Africa for holiday from URE. I would like to do that in my life. But this is incredible what is happening here. So then these people are looking for anchor. What countries can be our relations? Where can we establish relations? If you all remember Meg Whitman, the US ambassador to Kenya, and read the last presentation Whitman made in New York. They went to a roadshow talking about Kenya. And it was one of the most beautiful messages, which I would like every Kenyan ambassador to take heed of. There's no point talk about Maasai and, you know, animal all the time. Kenya offer more. We offer stability. We offer consistent leadership. We offer one of the largest economy in Africa, the 4th or 5th. We're playing back and forth with Angola. Angola is coming up. Kenya is going to surpass it, projected. Ethiopia has gone before us. And so the world is looking at that. Where can we anchor? We have the regional financial hub. We have the structure that benefit or the investment as they're coming into Africa. And they're looking at Africa in a different way. Based on what Whitman is saying, corporate America has looked at Africa differently. A risky environment. It's a place where I go and make quick money and leave. But now the idea is to look at the long-term relationship with Africa. The kind the US has done to Germany, the kind they have done to Japan, the kind they have done to South Korea and Singapore and the rest. So Africa is looking at not visitor. Africa is looking at a long-term relationship. So Kenya is now playing its part. It is demonstrated the role Kenya has played in Ethiopia, the role Kenya is playing in DRC Congo, the role Kenya has played in South Sudan is all encompassing. And Africa is going to go through a very, very serious challenge because this second visit is not going to be easy. It's a mixture of friendship and also drastically we're going to see wars in Africa between one country to another because of the technology which are used in Ukraine will find itself into Africa. And it's going to be muddy. And we have to try to make sense of it. So people, the rest of the world, are trying to create beachhead in Africa. And so Kenya provide a vehicle, an entry point on which to establish yourself. And therefore, we, the Africans, we the Kenyans, have got to be very careful in terms of negotiating relationship, like we're doing a bilateral relationship with the United States right now, something I've called for a long time. That is a legitimate, substantive relationship where we need to put a lot of effort. Okay. That's what is going on right now. All right. So forget all these domestic things, we're calling each other name and all that. You know, this is not going to help anybody. President Ruto is elected president for at least for 5 years, and then we can have election and you know, somebody else comes. So we need to focus on forward looking. We don't need to focus on you know, asking questions of legitimacy and all that kind of thing.
All right. Ambassador, I'm listening to Professor Noah Midamba, and it sounds to me like it's another scramble for Africa, maybe on different terms. President William Ruto, at least on the question of climate change, said we need to stop casting Africa in the role of victim. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, and tougher questions on the management of the African Union, because that's an issue he raised. How much of this flurry of international visitors has to do with this? Washington trying to wreck Russia-Africa summit, Russia's Lavrov. Because we saw repeatedly President William Ruto with the Japanese Prime Minister as well as the German Chancellor, but at least with the Japanese Prime Minister is when his statement was like more hard-hitting. He spoke of Russia's aggression, you know, towards Ukraine. How much of this has to do with this summit that's coming up? Is it in June or July? Let me see. Let me get that from this article. Even as I find it, Ambassador, your thoughts?
All of you have asked quite a number of questions in your One of them, of course, is to ask, to say, is there a new scramble for Africa? And then you have raised the question of the flurry of activities in the last week, with many visitors being in Kenya, and then the last one, the Russia and summit. Let me start with the one on the visitors that have come to Kenya, and build on a lot that has been said by my colleagues here. First, there is an element of coincidence that all these visitors happen to have been here, but also you have to look at the individual roles of each of these visitors play on international stage and why they would have wanted to come to Africa. And there is also an element of the role that Kenya is playing. Now, to start with, if you look at, for instance, the Japanese Prime Minister to Kenya, Japan is going to host the G7 summit. And as a host of G7 summit, it confers a little bit of your legitimacy as chair of that summit to have seen to have consulted the other continents. And it's obvious that if you look at Japan-Africa relations, which I was privileged to look at when I was at the AU, Kenya stands out as one of the #1. Japan has invested a lot in Africa, in education, in agriculture, and the rest in many other sectors, technology. And so Japan would want to project that image globally, that yes, Japan has relations with Africa and the rest. And one can say the same thing, for instance, with Guterres coming. Guterres is coming because Kenya is playing the role of regional peace. President Ruto has been asked to intervene in the matter of Sudan. President Uhuru is intervening in the matter of DRC. We have boots on the ground in Sudan, not in Sudan, but in DRC and also in Somalia. And so you would expect Guterres coming to Africa, especially the current topical issues, is Sudan. And so Guterres has to come to Kenya to talk to the person who has been mandated to try and solve the problem, to agree on what is it that the international community can do to support Kenya's effort, plus that of Salva Kiir and other leaders to solve that crisis. German Africa, again, if you look again within the context of where Kenya stands, from the divide that was there, the East-West, the cold, economic diplomacy, Kenya has always stood up as one of the gateways to Africa. And so that is why I talked about some coincidence, but also because of the role Kenya plays and the standing of Kenya in that. But of course, I mean, one cannot rule out that there will be those that what they say in public when they issue a joint statement and what is said behind the curtains, you are not privy to that. But they would also be concerned to say, okay, you've been a stable democracy. Can you continue to maintain it? And as they have said, even when we have disagreements, the one thing I like, you listen to all, both sides. They are talking of within the Constitution, upholding the rule of law, constitutionalism. That's what everybody is talking about. Even when we have disagreement, it is not disagreement just hitting each other in the streets, but we are saying we want to follow the law, which to me is a very good way of saying that is maturity, that's how you build a nation. And those that manage must then make sure that we all stay within the law. That's the only way you can then build a strong democracy. The second question that you raised is there a scramble for Africa? The scramble never finished. It has never, it's not a new, but there is renewed interest. The renewed interest comes because of what Noah read out, that long list of the minerals. Climate change is here. And one of the things that must be addressed is how do we go into green development, green economy. Africa holds over 60% of the minerals that are going to be used in greening the economy. So who would not want to have a stake of that? And they are worried at the moment because these minerals perhaps are being controlled by others like China and the rest. Europe has always had access to Africa's minerals. And so they want to make sure that they hold it. And that's why they have all these agreements I have a slight position from that of Noah. I do agree that having this agreement is good, but we must read, because the devil is in the detail. Because a lot of them just want market access. They want Africa to continue to be a market of their products and a supply of raw materials. And Africa is saying, we must add value. Because if you look at some of the policies that are being implemented, for instance, if you look at the US, what they are doing under what they call job creation, decarbonization, and security, and then you look at what they call inflation, act, and you look at the incentives built on it, is to try and force shifting of manufacturing into the US. And so we must be careful, because we will still remain at the mercy of these countries. And Europe is doing the same. Look at what they have done, what they call the border climate policies, which make it very difficult for us to export, but also make sure that they safeguard and attract industries into there. So we must watch and be careful, because this is part of the scramble, and we are just pawns on the chessboard, and so that we safeguard Africa's interest. The scramble is on. Scramble never finished, but there is new interest, because Africa is indeed, the beauty is talking about is the minerals we have, it's the market we have, it's the population that we have. You can see they are also looking at the declining capacity for them to sustain consumption, because the population is aging. They don't even have enough labor. Africa will be very strong going forward, but we must then be careful on how we engage them.
Okay.
And that pushes me to the point concerning Russia, Africa. Africa, as part of that scramble, has always had these dialogues with a number of countries. There is Africa-China dialogue. There is Africa-Russia dialogue. There is Africa-Japan dialogue. Africa-Europe, Africa-USA, and on and on. So this is not going to be the first time that Africa is having this meeting with Russia. There has been one before.
Yes, this is the second one.
Yeah, this is the second one. So there is nothing unusual about it. But of course, given the environment that is prevailing, particularly Russia having invaded Ukraine and the scramble that is there, everybody would want to scatter that summit. The president talked to it, and he took a position which I remember even when we were at the African Union, we kept on telling them, there's no need of you 55 coming to sit with one gentleman and all having a ball saying begging. It doesn't look good. Just send a few of you to represent Africa. To me, I couldn't agree with you more. That formula is there already. It is just implementation. And I can see from what you were saying, that position is now starting to take root, which to me, Africa should wake up with and work with heads up. Not all of us being summoned and we all go there, we are put in the buses, we are lectured, and then go back home with a few signatures of agreements, token help, and then you look good with the photo op. That's not really diplomacy. They are the ones who teach diplomacy that they can stand for. Yes. All.
Does it signal a shift to you, Dr. Maluki, in how Africa engages the rest of the world?
Well, good question. But I want to go back to the Kenyan case before I come to that. And what I want to pick from my colleagues is what lessons can Kenya learn from these visiting and the current international dispensation? I want to observe that globally, in global governance is difficult, and practically all countries have got their own share of problems and challenges. There's no country in the world today which can say that they have it all, they have all what they want. And the code word in international relations today is coordination and working together, having collaborations. And this is what the message that came from Biden's host of the African leaders, that the US is looking for partnerships. And quite a lot of time, there has been opportunities coming up in Europe, in America, but the African states have not taken advantage of those opportunities. And I think this is where I want to begin, that it is the responsibility of our diplomacy to actually gauge the international environment and see how it can position the country in a way that can benefit, because international system keeps on changing. And now we are at a situation whereby we have emerging multipolarity, providing a lot of options for many countries. And this is what I want to say, that Kenya actually has been earmarked as one of maybe promising, stable state, responsible state. And I think this came from the German Chancellor, talked about Kenya upholding the UN principles, the climate responsibility. So what I'm trying to say, that we should, as a country, seize this opportunity and have our diplomacy well grilled and well skilled, and actually put a lot of emphasis in exposure, in training, because the quality of life that a country enjoys is actually a reflection of the quality of diplomacy there. It's our diplomat who go there to negotiate for us. They actually code for markets, technology. And what I'm trying to say, that now that the global environment is kind of warming up, Kenya should seize the opportunity to really be more aggressive internationally and provide that hope that the international society want to see. The world is saying, can we have Africa taking charge of its responsibility? And I think Professor said that the president of China or US doesn't care about the child who sleeps hungry. So I think this is a lesson that we can take, that it is our time, and let us seize this opportunity by being aggressive in our diplomacy and providing the hope, the hunger state. I want to appreciate the Minister of Foreign Affairs for a number of things that is done. Of course, one of the best institutions that it has come up with, the Foreign Service Academy. I'm aware that through the Foreign Service Academy, our diplomats have really been going through a lot of inductions, a lot of training, and this is a reflection of the hard work, the good job that they are doing out there. So I think this is an area where we need to have think tanks that can sit, evaluate the international system the way it is, and then advise the government on the best options that are available.
Which I think is the point Professor Midamba was also making when he was talking about local support. Yes, on the question of, are we going to see a shift in the way Africa engages the rest of the world?
No, we may not see a lot of shift, but one of the things that is emerging in Africa is the brevity. I think Africa has come of age. It is speaking out its mind, and this is exactly what the trend that we need to sustain. I remember the words of Ambassador Kimani during the vote with the UN General Assembly vote against Russia. And Kenya was very vocal that we stand by constitutionalism, we stand by the international sanctity of international borders, and therefore that was wrong. And this is, we want an assertive Africa. We want an Africa which can say, this is what we stand for. I have in mind what is happening in Sudan today, and we may need a kind of international voice which can bring out some of the contestation, because what is showing on the ground is that there are other hidden agendas by the great powers. And probably this international voice has been lacking in Africa. So as the environment unfolds, we need African to have an international voice to say that we have option with the Chinese, we have option with the Russians, we have option with the Americans. But Africa should never again go back to be controlled by one power or to be kind of twisted. We should be allowed to be, and actually we have to assert ourselves and play according to the rules of international law.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be east or west,
no,
is what I'm hearing you say. And Professor Midamba, I need to take a break, but we'll come back with that. And also, how much of these visits had to do with Kenya's economic stability? Remember this former President Uhuru Kenyatta during an interview, and Mark Masai was one of the interviewees together with Hussein Mohammed of The Citizen then. Now he is the president's spokesperson. But it was a question on Kenya's debt, and former President Uhuru Kenyatta said, I will borrow. And he asked Mark Masai, what is Japan's GDP, is it debt to GDP ratio? GDP. And he talked about it's over 100%. But when the Japan's PM was here, it reminded me of this moment, because the question of Kenya's debt situation arose. So how much of these visits also had something to do with Kenya's economic stability? We look at that on the other side of this breakout, including the possibility of permanent seats for the continent, as well as in G20 following these visits.
All transactions with DTB are secure. Achieving more for you is the least we can do. Because at Diamond Trust Bank, you don't just bank with us, you bank on us.
On my dark marks, I've tried everything from A to Z, even vitamin C, but hardly any results. Nivea Lumina 630 works from day one, with visible results in just 2 weeks and 71% dark marks reduction in 12. Join the 1 million women already using the #1 Lumina 630 from Nivea.
With Molfix pants, changing diapers is now very easy. I tear and take off the used Molfix pants and pull the new one up in a moment. Wrap up the used diaper and throw it away. Come on, mothers, try Molfix baby pants and be part of our happiness movement.
I came in, she pulled out the gun and said if she can't have me, nobody can. What do I do?
It's your fault that my marriage is falling apart.
Diana.
Get out of here! Get out of here now! Get out!
What this woman needs from you is simply your attention. Give her that, and you'll see she'll stop acting so stupid!
Andres? Don't tell me the cab stand I called sent you to pick me up.
Quite a coincidence. Natalia.
Head over heels.
Santon, a fun new world of flavor. Fruity freshness in every sip.
Own your dream home for as low as 1.98 million Kenya shillings in Vipingo Kilifi. SMS Vipingo to 22365 or call us today on 0740 400 215. Terms and conditions apply.
All right. Ambassador. Ambassador, we are back. We are live now. So just to confirm that I confirmed that this Russia-Africa summit will take place at the end of July. But something that came up with regard to these summits, and you were speaking about this, Dr. Maluki. You said,
yes.
You were talking about the China-Africa summit, the US-Africa summit, and all these summits. And something that President William Ruto said, which you also referenced as a panel, is this business of all the leaders, African leaders, being boarded onto a bus, to meet one person across the table. Is there a case to be made for the proposal that President William Ruto gave, and he said this will be the policy moving forward, is we send the 5 RECs, and you've told me that stands for Regional Economic Communities. But the challenge, he said then, is that African countries don't want to cede some of their sovereignty, because he said the European Union Commission can negotiate on behalf of the Union, but the same does not apply with the African Union. Ambassador?
Well, there are 2 separate issues here. First of all, having a summit and also the negotiations. On the summit, there is a decision already taken at the African Union that when we have dialogue with any of the countries, unless it's continent to continent, if you are meeting Africa, Europe, all the European leaders come, plus the Commission, and African leaders go there also with the Commission. But the challenge is when you are meeting one country, like say China, India, or Japan, and those countries have always said, look, we are also like Europe, so we want all African leaders to come. But the African countries decided, and that is the format that is at the African Union, because what you call the Permanent Representatives Committee, the ambassadors based in Addis, they prepare for that summit normally. It's not done at capitals. That's where the agenda is drawn, the outcomes are agreed. So when they meet, then they already have quite some work that has been done. The format that was agreed to was, let us send the chairs of regional economic communities, the presidents who chair those regional, and there are 8, by the way, there are 8 recognized by the African Union, from ECOWAS, ECAS, East African Community, COMESA, SADC, and all that. These are the ones that now should send their chairs to sit with that leader and speak on behalf of the continent, because they embrace the continent. Plus, the chairman of the African Union Summit and the chairman of the African Union Commission. Plus, of course, the African Union Commission is the one which services those meetings normally. They should be there then to do the negotiations. And I think that is a principle that has not been implemented. It has been there. And so now what I hear the leaders are saying, they should. Then you raised another question that...
ceding sovereignty.
Ceding sovereignty. This is on matters of pooling, and I think there is one, I think it's the president who argued about it, or somebody else who said, we are stronger when we pool our sovereignty than when we use it individually. But that's not how countries see it. All countries tend to retain their sovereignty. What does it mean? For instance, in Europe, on matters trade, it is the European Commission that speaks for the European Union, no one else. You can't go to Germany to negotiate market access to Europe. You can't go to Italy, you can't go to France. You go to the Commission. But even in Europe, when it comes to foreign diplomacy, they have not ceded to the European Union. They all still project their national. That's why you see France with a campaign, or going the campaign of the chair of the president of the Commission to China. When they reach there, he states France policy. So even Europe has not attained that. And part of the reason why there was Brexit is Britain felt that they cannot cede their sovereignty to Paris, to Brussels. So there are some areas they reserve, but a number of areas they have agreed. For instance, they have now a common currency that is ceding their sovereignty. They have a common central bank that is ceding their sovereignty. They have a common passport, allowing visa, that is ceding their sovereignty. But there are some areas which they don't allow, particularly when it comes to matters of foreign policy.
All right. How much, and Professor Midamba, this is the question I had posed to you before we took the break. How much of these visits has to do, or had to do, with Kenya's economic stability?
Olive, what Ambassador Mwenche just said is real. The issue affecting Kenya cannot be looked at as a Kenyan. The issue is now globally interwoven. They are Africa, they are impacting the entire continent of Africa. They are impacting the region. And then the world is looking at, in each region, who's a leader in that region. And they're trying to get as close to that leadership, because that leadership is the open door to creating relationship with other countries. So here's my point. Africa has to create a renewed vigor for what it's all about. Africa is the most powerful continent, one of the most powerful continents in the world. Because, you know, the other day you saw gold all over in Britain, which looked beautiful. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't ever know when Britain produced any gold. And so where is that gold coming from? It mostly is coming from Africa. Then why can Africa now create institutions like AU? We don't need China to come and build assembly hall for us or buy pencils for us. We need to respect that institution. We need to build it. Each country needs to do the same thing. We need to understand the issue of governance and value our people so that we can solidify as a continent. So here are a number of things. Africa must insist on permanent representative at the Security Council. 55 countries compare with the rest. We need a voice in that Security Council. We need to change the Security Council arrangement from being controlled by a few people to multi-people. That is a message we need to create across the board. We need to focus and be front on climate change. This is no question about it. We need a more robust show of African solidarity, substantive solidarity, not just OAU meeting, we are all together, and then the next day we have Francophone, Anglophone, and all those kind of people talking. We need a structure, build-up capacity for us to negotiate with outside. If America is coming in, what are we looking for? Are there going to be bilateral relationship that are substantial, that is something we can learn from? That's what Obama presented. I was in America when that happened. But the issue comes, I'm a dual citizen, US, Kenya. I benefited a lot from America. But the issue comes, can Kenya become South Korea? Can Kenya become Singapore, Taiwan? Can Kenya become Israel? If the nation of US is serious about substantive relationship with Africa, it's not, US aid is not going to do it, because US aid has a lot of problem. It is an American invested, American control. We need an African control. We need a substantive relationship with Kenya where investors are coming in to create value plus manufacturing establishment. And America can do it the way they have done it to other countries. Europe can do the same thing. We're looking at Europe that has really tight-knit come together. Even digital information, Europeans are comparing and controlling. And so you can move from Italy all the way to France, all the way to Belgium, and they know who you are, and they know all your movement. Can't do that in Africa. Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram are moving from West Africa to East Africa. Nigerians know who they are, but Kenyans don't. And so we need to reorganize and rethink about Africa, and then now establish the way we are going to deal with China, and the way we will deal with Russia, with the US, with Japan, and everybody. That is the only way Africa will benefit. Otherwise, they will come in now and take over again like 139 years ago.
Interesting. Dr. Maluki, how possible is it for Africa to speak? How not possible, it is possible, but how realistic is the expectation that Africa can speak in one voice? And I ask this because of already within ourselves, we can't seem to agree. Professor Midamba spoke about Anglophone and Francophone. We have instability in the Horn of Africa. And then also something else that President William Ruto spoke about, and he phrased it as stupid. He said in Somalia, for example, we're waiting for the European Union to give us $85 million for Somalia. And he was like, why can't we raise that among ourselves?
Thank you, Olive. I think the economic question is very important because your global voice is dependent on the size of your economy. When you talk about G7, what are we talking about? You are talking about the 7 greatest economies. G20, you know, that's a measure. And therefore, it's the responsibility of Africa to really work on its economy. I think majorly, there is no prescription today on how best you can manage an economy. There are so many competing ideologies, and we have seen countries organizing their economies differently. But the bottom line that you must provide for your population, you must actually have food on the table. So I think that here the challenge is, given all the existing ideologies and economic kind of method of planning, what will be the best way for Africa to deal with its economic problems? We have seen the failure of foreign aid. It has been pumped, but many people have seen that aid has never helped Africa. We have seen the multilateral donors, IMF, the World Bank, etc. But I think from where I stand, the African solution to economic problem is trade. We must do business. We must work on our business-friendly environment. I want to applaud the establishment of African Continental Free Trade, and I think this is one way in which we are speaking to us among Africans. There's a lot of produce that is lying in Kenya, in Kikomba here, which needs to go to Ethiopia, needs to go to Somalia and other, but because of the trade bottlenecks, we've not taken advantage. So I think this is one area where Africa needs to put its house in order so that we can grow business, we can do value addition of whatever we produce. And therefore, if that can happen, then of course we would be adding voice on the national arena. Added to this, I want also to look at the emerging scenario where you have Africans being invited by one head of state and the 55 presidents go there. I think we have to appreciate that in Africa, we are still young in terms of regionalism. And we cannot compare ourselves with Europe, which has gone ahead in many ways. But we need to separate some things. One, we have to recognize the existence of sovereign states, and these are sovereign states which are not going to cede their sovereignty in anytime soon. But how can we work within our sovereignty so that we do not impede other continental issues? Because when you look at Africa, there is something that needs us together. And this is where we are saying, can we have a common voice? When Professor Midaba talks about the UN's Security Council seat, it's really, it's deserving. But how can we approach that? We can only do that by leveraging on our numbers. 55 members of the UN, what can we do? And so here, as much as we protect our sovereignty, there are areas where we need to work together as a continent. And we must also be alive to the historical, whether you call them injustice, but experiences, which are there, that Africa really suffered, unfortunately, and we cannot undo history, and we cannot lament. We are not victims, actually, but actually survivors. And we must now wake up and see where we went wrong and how we can capitalize on our numbers, on our potential, so that now the rest of the world can listen to Africa. So I think the question of beefing up the African Union, having maybe a kind of an understanding where some global issues like climate change, issues of global pandemics like we had the COVID-19, Africa can have a common voice which actually represents the entire continent. But then on other domestic issues which are national, of course the African states are going to stay. They are not going to just eclipse over time. And therefore, this is the dualism that Africa has to battle with. And within that, can still find space within the global table.
All right. Ambassador, what do you make of the statement by President Ruto that the management of the African Union needs to change?
Well, it's a deep statement, and I understand where he's coming from. He talked two things concerning the budget, but also concerning the things we are talking about, how we approach our foreign policy as Africa, but also he talked about how we manage internal issues like the conflicts within the continent. On the budget, it's a pity that really implementation tends to be a bit slow, because if I remember even before we left, there was a summit that was held in Kigali, and it adopted a principle that is being used by the European Union, and that is funding the Union, which says that 0.2 of your customs revenue is ring-fenced and kept by the Treasury and transferred to the Commission to be able to manage not only administrative operations, but also some of it invested on peace and security. Of that decision, I'm now told about 17 or so countries are implementing. And those countries that are implementing it, they don't have challenge. So there is already a decision. There's a mechanism. It's implementation. Some would argue, I remember some of the countries, particularly the larger ones, were feeling 0.2 is too big. The Commission and the the ministers of finance who worked on this from the continent had a solution to it. They said, look, what we can do, let us prepare a budget. Once we agree that this is the budget that we are going to use for the year, that is, and you transfer proportionally to that budget. The rest you retain at your national level, and it can be used for regional programs, like building interconnection, like the SGR and the rest. Countries which implemented this, Kenya is one of them. In fact, Kenya was the very first to implement it. And I can tell you that Kenya has had a very good record when it comes to remittances to the African Union and other regional economic communities on that. So there is a decision, is implementation, and is being implemented on that. On matters then on how do we, I think on foreign policy we have talked about, where the African leaders are saying, look, let us speak at least a coordinated voice. We may not speak one voice, but let's have coordination so that when we speak coherently. And that's why they meet, discuss, agree on the agenda, and then when they go there, it's articulated by the chair. Because you can't listen to 55. But of course, countries, what the professor is saying here, you know, that, oh, well, sovereignty, you can't give it overnight. 60 years down the road, we're still hanging to it. We still remain poor. We're still sinking, hanging to this sovereignty. For how long? Really, there comes a time we must ask ourselves, united will be strong. And this is what Nkrumah told them. Nkrumah, when he saw the establishment of the OAU and AU, he told them, you now have these flags, which you have gotten, this token independence that you have been given a nation to go and run with the constitution. But you can only gain independence when you have control of your economy. That we have not gained, and we are still struggling. And why is it? Because we are divided. We are small nations. That's why even our markets are so small that you cannot establish meaningful industries because you don't have economies of scale and the rest. So we need to work on that. On matters peace and security, this is again a very complex issue. The president talked about, well, in Somalia, the budget is 185. Can't we pay this? If we follow that formula I mentioned about, it wouldn't be difficult. But then the matters of peace and security, again, you know, that's where you have the UN Peace and Security Council. You cannot intervene in peace and security without the authorization of UN. And then there is also a process on how you go about it. But all said and done, I must say here that the African Union has gone ahead. Out of that budget, again, I mentioned, there is now building of a peace fund, which I'm told is almost $300 million US, which continue to earn interest to run this. But one operation, like going to Somalia, and I saw that budget passing through my fingers, is millions and millions, because putting boots on the ground is not easy. You have to have aircraft, you feed the soldiers, you have to fuel the planes, you have to develop a camp, you have to buy ammunition, you have to have resources for that. It's very difficult. That's where the UN comes in. And the formula was, Africa would contribute certain amount, and the UN then would contribute, and the friends of Africa can come in, because peace and security is a global commodity. When there is a problem in Somalia, where do the refugees go? They go to Europe. So Europe has that responsibility to say, let's have peace in Somalia and the rest. So this is the approach that peace we should have. And I should say, there is already a mechanism. It is work in progress. Of course, some of it is very slow. Some of the countries still retain this small independent national flag. That's why you see that now airlines collapse, because each country wants to have a small airline which can survive. If we work together, we'll be stronger.
Okay. Professor Midamba, is the conversation now moving in the right direction? When we hear President William Ruto say on climate change, we want to talk about investment and technology. Don't limit us to victims and loss and damage. When he talks about there's a thumb on the scale of the global financial architecture that is rigged, he used the term rigged, against us. Is he now moving the conversation in the right direction?
Well, let me follow up to what Ambassador just said. There is a point I want to drive home. Professor Julian of University of Trinidad and Tobago is the one who founded that university. And he created University of Petroleum and Gas. And Trinidad and Tobago are the only black country that were able to exploit and get their oil into the world without any help from the big company. And so most of oil and gas workers, top workers, are from Trinidad and Tobago. They're all Julian's students, former students. Magufuli invited Julian to Tanzania because he was concerned about the gas. Tanzania is a huge gas belt. But you look at it, and Tanzania don't own it. It is owned by international investors for 60 years. And so he invited Julian to come and do a study. At the same time, we had invited Julian at KCA to help us establish a program for Turkana so that we can have control over the petroleum we were going to dig there. So he did study, and the day he was presented his report to Magufuli, he invited me to go, and I was there. And he said, Tanzania don't have control over their gas. And Magufuli looked at him and said, what do we do? And he recommended that they buy it before even those people began exploration. Cost billions. Buy it back so that the country can control it. I can say to you for certain, Oli, Tanzania is the only country in Africa now that has control over their gas, based on what Magufuli said. Nigeria is a basket case, Angola is a basket case, all others. Ghana was almost coming to that level before Professor Julian intervened and help them to control. So what am I saying? The estimated natural resources in Congo, which is about $25 trillion, can be controlled by Congolese and can be controlled by the region. And Congo itself can feed the entire continent of Africa. And can you believe that kind of wealth when we control that kind of wealth? When we create value added to gold so that they don't take raw material and create all this monumental kind of stuff outside. And so back to the tea in Kenya. Kenya has now moved ahead to control tea and create value added. We are one of the largest supplier right now of value added tea. Simply because we have passed Ceylon and we passed China for doing that. Can you believe that one item and the value that is created to us? So, you know, from coffee makers like Starbucks, they cannot take our best coffee and then supply it to China, to everywhere. Starbucks don't have a shop here. Okay, we must insist for them to have manufacture right here and set up shop so that they create jobs and value added to our people. So we have to be pinpointed. And that's why, like what President Ruto is saying, is, you know, we cannot be complacent. We cannot continue talking. Ambassador Mwenche can tell you this AU place is full of written reports. Beautiful, bounded, signed, but nobody follow. If you can tell me that a country like, I don't want to name the names, a country cannot pay the obligation. I belong to East Africa. I want benefit from it when all these goodies come, but I don't want to pay my dues. And Kenya is consistently paying its due in East Africa. I sit on the Inter-University Council of East Africa. We need the countries to contribute, the 8 countries to contribute, because scholarships are coming. But these countries which cannot pay their dues, when scholarship comes, say, where is mine? We are expected to have 5. Where is our 5? You know, we have to be reason with each other. That's what Europeans have done. And they're integrated and they're creating system. Their money, my friend here talk about airline. Why is Uganda creating their own airline? Why is Rwanda creating their? Why don't we have the East African airline, which will integrate Kenyan Airways into the system such that we can have a powerful vehicle which we support with each other? Ethiopia is the only profitable airline in the continent of Africa. The rest cannot because they're small. And Europeans' flights are huge and profitable. So these are the kind of things we're talking about. Mike Eldon, my friend, just sent a note. He's watching what we're saying. And Mike said, aid does not help Africa. You see, because there is a way you give one hand and the other hand you take back. So overall, the net result is that it does not help Africa. So like Muluki was saying, we need trade. We need a balanced trade. We need a clear, substantive agreement where we're going to say, you will set up manufacturing in Nairobi or in Kwale, and this is how many people we expect to hire and everything, and then we export the product back to your territory.
Okay. All right, so that will have to be the last one. I'm so sorry, Dr. Maluki. I have a very insistent director in my ear. But this morning, and I will invite you gentlemen back if you're available to continue this conversation, because there's also a question I had wanted to pose to Dr. Maluki, yes. and how much, and I wanted to ask you how much of Guterres' visit had to do with this. Senior UN official, President Ruto is ruthless. I don't trust him. This is the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohamed, but we'll have to leave it for another day. This morning with me in studio, I have had Dr. Patrick Maluki, Chair, Department of Diplomacy and International Studies, University of Nairobi. We last heard from Professor Noah Midamba, former Vice Chancellor, KCA University, Professor of Defense and Foreign Policy, Ambassador Erastus Mwencha, who has given us the insider information, having been former Deputy Chairman, African Union Commission, and former Secretary General, COMESA. Gentlemen, it has been a very informative discussion for me. Thank you for joining us. Coming up is Your World.